So we're going to look at Samson Agonistes for our last class in Milton. The last major work that Milton wrote was Samson Agonistes. It was printed alongside Paradise Regained, and is quite an extraordinary conclusion to Milton's poetic career. In the form, you can see that it's a tragedy, but it's not a tragedy meant to be performed. It's what we will call a closet drama. So it is something to be read rather than performed. The critics vary in their views on when it was written. You can see in his notebooks in the 1640s, the time of the Civil War, lead up to it, that he had ideas about writing a tragedy, and so there are various topics related to that. Many of them did relate to Samson, however, and in the end that's what he decided he would write upon. Just like when he conceived he should write an epic, he thought about doing it on Arthur or some of the other subjects that other epic writers in his era had considered, and then lit upon the one he finally did. Samson Agonistes will also bring all sorts of speculation to your minds about why he chose this particular subject matter, particularly given his own conditions, the fact that he was blind, and the fact that the conclusion of Samson's life is the hero's death, and also the destruction of the enemies of Israel. So he is he's one of the judges. And behind me I have Judges 13, beginning with the birth of Samson, which moves on all the way for another 4 or odd chapters. So in terms of the book of Judges, a great deal of time is taken to deal with the topic of this particular judge. And it's a little bit surprising, given that, particularly given the way in which his life plays out. Because he's a spectacular failure. In certain ways, he seems very much like a pagan hero, insofar as he is a sort of a Hercules-like figure, has great physical strength and seemingly superhuman strength, and in fact that's God-given. But there are certain things about Samson and you even wonder, what does this have to do with Jesus? But there's no doubt that amongst the judges there's something very peculiar about Samson, which draws parallels with the life of Christ. And one of them is related simply to the circumstances of his birth. It's announced by an angel. And this is very unusual. This is not something that happens to the judges in general, or even prophets or other figures. So that alone marks him out as unusual. And again, will make us contemplate the parallels with Christ. He also is born rather miraculously. His mother is not a virgin like Jesus was, but his mother is infertile. She can't bear children. So there's another parallel to be drawn there. Will make us think of at least, if not, this is, it's a sort of a type, a hint or an arrow pointing forward to a type that will be fulfilled in an antitype. Likewise, his mission as a judge is to save the Israelites from the Philistines and their false gods. And Jesus likewise is to save Israel, but not just Israel, the whole world from sin. And more specifically related to Samson, and this is slightly confusing, he is a Nazirite, so he's taken a vow not to drink, not to shave his hair. Jesus is a Nazarene. Very confusing. I remember thinking, is that the same thing? And it's not. He's born in Nazareth. That makes him a Nazarene, but it's got nothing to do with being a Nazirite. He's taken no vow not to drink alcohol or shave his hair. So the pictures of Jesus with the long hair may be slightly confusing. I'm not sure that he would necessarily have had long hair. I don't know. I don't recall any reference to hair length in the Gospels. But he was blessed by God. He was moved by the Holy Spirit in the same way Jesus was. So there are many significance. And in his death, also, there is a liberation that takes place. Same here. So there are similarities for sure. And what he is, and I think this is the title of the, this is the title of the, I'll put it back up here. The title of the drama is Samson Agonistes. Samson, the people's champion. The fighter, the one who's in an agon or a struggle. And it's a story in which a hero is plagued by spectacular sin in his own life, and yet the sin makes him become more and more aware of his own fallibility and weakness and of the surpassing strength that still resides within him because it's not within him. And so through his awareness of his weakness, he gains a strength that's not his, or an awareness of it. So it draws on the passage in Judges, as I say, Judges chapters 13 to 16, and dramatizes that. Probably starts at this point here. Manoah said to his wife, "We shall surely die because we have seen God." But his wife said to him, "If the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering from our hands, nor would he have shown us all these things, nor would he have told us such things as these at this time." And so the son is born. So that's where the story begins. And we see right at the outset that Samson is aware of the significance of his birth. I'm going to backtrack and talk about his argument here at the beginning a little bit and his explanation for why he writes what he writes. But right here in 58, he makes us aware of his awareness that his strength comes not from his physical frame, but rather directly from God. So there's an awareness right from the outset here. He says, what is strength without a double share of wisdom? And the answer is vast, unwieldy, burdensome, proudly secure, yet liable to fall. So he's reflecting on what strength is from a biblical perspective. And we've seen how Milton has reflected on that in the book we just read, Paradise Regained, in which Jesus is offered all the world's glory. And that sort of physical strength, the military strength, all the ways in which the world is dominated. And Samson is reflecting on that with considerable wisdom. What is strength? Without a double share of wisdom, it's vast, unwieldy, burdensome, proudly secure, yet liable to fall. By weakest subtleties, not made to rule, but to subserve where wisdom bears command. God, when he gave me strength to show withal how slight the gift was, hung it in my hair. So he's aware right from the beginning of how weak what the world regards as strength is. The people will regard him as their champion. They will take great joy in the fact that Samson is such a strong man. And he is such a strong man. But they don't understand the power of God, which is not residing in physical human strength. But Samson himself does. So it's interesting. You need to see this at the beginning of the work. It's not something that dawns on him as he goes. He's aware of it very early on. This does not prevent him from falling or from sinning, but still, that message which he says here, a very mature position, that of Mr. Milton himself. Remember, he was in Cromwell's government, in power. Cromwell, who had subdued the enemies of the Commonwealth in Scotland and Ireland, had defeated the armies of Charles I, and yet the Commonwealth came to naught. The Republic fell, and Milton was now under house arrest and blind. And so with those biographical details in mind, he's writing a tragedy. And that in itself, I think, is also interesting. Why a tragedy? Why does he choose this particular work? It obviously seems to reflect on his own blindness and perhaps on the failure of the government of Cromwell, and the fact that it lacked the virtue and the trust in God which Milton thought was requisite for its continuance. And so it came down, much as many of the reigns of the judges fell, because in the end they were sinful and disloyal and lacked trust and trusted in earthly might and so forth. And Cromwell himself put on the trappings of a king. He refused to be crowned king, but he very much looked a lot like a king. And I'm sure Milton was not particularly pleased with this. Milton believed that the Bible was better in its classical forms than those of the Greeks and Romans. This is an interesting thing as well. And we've already seen that in Paradise Lost, that although he's writing a classical epic, he transforms it in many ways and makes it his own form. And after Milton, it's impossible to think of the epic other than in the terms that Milton reforges that sword, if you will. Because it now is about human character and the human heart in a way that it hadn't been before. It really was the deeds that were done, but not the person, the internal man, the paradise within. That sort of turn within marks the epic after that. So the Romantics, when they write their epics, write psychological types of epics. For better or for worse. But when he's talking about the epic, let me say a little bit about this. So backtracking a little bit. Title page of Tragedy. Is this actually it? Yes. Tragedy, as it was anciently composed, hath been ever held the gravest, moralest, and most profitable of all other poems. Therefore said by Aristotle to be of power by raising pity and fear, or terror, to purge the mind of those in such like passions. That is, to temper and reduce them to just measure with a kind of delight, stirred up by reading or seeing those passions well imitated. Nor is nature wanting in her own effects to make good his assertion. For so in physic, things of melancholic hue and quality are used against melancholy, sour against sour, salt to remove salt humors. Now he's talking about a form of medicine here. And the way in which you cure a snake bite is with a little bit more snake bite, antivenom, right? Sometimes you cure things with their opposites. Sometimes you treat it with this. So the way in which you treat melancholy is with tragedy, and with the sense of, I guess he may be ministering to his own soul here, and as I say, under house arrest and blind, with with the great Republic of Cromwell having failed, with Charles II coming back. And now we have a king who's restored a religion that Milton thinks is a blight on his country. And yet he's not attacking Charles. He's reflecting on earthly might and its and how fleeting it is and how failing it is, and thinking about the kingdom of God and the paradise within. And so he says that it is of style and uniformity, and that commonly called the plot, or of the style. Where is this? I'm just reading from my notes here. Of the style and the uniformity, and that commonly called the plot, whether intricate or explicit, whether intricate, which is nothing indeed but such economy or disposition of the fables may stand best with the, never mind. They only will best judge who are not unacquainted with Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, the three great tragic poets unequaled yet by any, and the best rule to all who endeavored to write tragedy. The circumscription of time, wherein the whole drama begins and ends, is according to the ancient rule and best example within the space of 24 hours. So the timeline is very brief. So he will backtrack and recount the incidents of Samson's life that led to this point for sure, just to bring us up to speed. But the action actually takes place towards the end of Samson's life. and thereby makes it a sort of tragedy in terms of its unity of place, time, and action, the three unities that Aristotle speaks of, replicated in the 18th century, where there's a great number of tragedies being written as well. And the French neoclassical school with Racine and company talks about this and is very prescriptive about these three unities. But Milton is interesting. Say, it suffices if the whole drama be found not produced beyond the fifth act. So it has to take place relatively quickly, and relying on Hebrew scripture for his inspiration allows Milton to emphasize a plot that he thinks is central to human life. And he uses some aspects of Greek tragedy, but he's not slavish to them. So it's a Hebrew story while having the trappings of a Greek tragedy. And he thinks he's improved upon the Greek tragedy thereby. So just like he improved upon the epic by basing it on the fall of mankind and talking about the paradise lost and the paradise regained, the paradise within, happier far, likewise, he is now addressing the greatest and gravest of all literary forms, gravest, moralest, and most profitable. Now he turns to the tragedy at the very end of his life and is going to try and outdo those three men that he cites here. Now he doesn't talk about outdoing them in this. It's not, but you probably think, and I think rightly so, that is actually what's going on here. So the argument, I don't think I need to reread that, but he is captive and blind and in prison. So he's just like Mr. Milton, right? So you find him right at the end of his life, in his last day of life, like Milton. He's captive, he's blind, and he's in prison in Gaza. It's a little bit probably dramatic on Milton's part. I don't think he's in prison. He's under house arrest. Doesn't matter. He's not Samson. They don't need to worry about him. He's not going to go out and do anything. But he's labor as in a common workhouse on a festival day, in the general cessation from labor, comes forth into the open air, etc. So it's right at the end of his life. There's the context, the timeline. And it is in the context of a military defeat. Again, parallels with Milton's own life. And yet, just like Milton, there is a light within him that has not been snuffed out. And the light will guide him, although he is blind, to on a noble path, even though he's doing a task of drudgery. Here, Samson is in a prison house. He's doing labor, forced labor. Even though he ought to be a day of rest, he is laboring. Maybe like Mr. Milton when he had to listen to parliamentary speeches. There we go again. And there's a sense of the great strength of Samson in view in the tragedy here, and we probably, if we want to draw parallels, have a sense of Milton's thought that he was the great poet who had been given a mighty gift by God, and a sense that perhaps he had not used that gift adequately, perhaps still, even after the success of Paradise Lost. He produces these two lesser poems, although still great, still major poems, I think. And there's a strong sense, which is repeated throughout Milton's corpus, that there is a paradise within, wherein true freedom lies. It's not in the external forms, even in political life. There is a peace and a contentment within that can be contradicted by the outward appearances. So when Paul writes his prison letters, he's talking about the freedom of a Christian. Though he is in chains, he speaks of the freedom that comes from the gospel. And I think Milton's replicating that here. But his father, old Manoah, doesn't understand this and is desperate, it's his boy, to free him, and he's willing to mortgage his house to do it. And likewise, his wife wants to offer him earthly comforts, to alleviate him of his suffering. So these are temptations actually to him. His friends are in. It's not because Milton's a Stoic or that Samson's a Stoic. His friends here are, in a sense, his enemies insofar as they're keeping him from his vocation, from his call to be the deliverer. And because it appears to them he's not going to be delivering anything. He can't even deliver the mail. And he's stuck here in a prison house. He's not delivering anything. And by all physical appearances, he is no deliverer. But he knows that he is the deliverer, and he knows that God will make it so. So when we come at the beginning, Manoah and his wife are going to tempt him in a way, to not to be disobedient to God, but to lose hope in his vocation. Yes, comment?
Dr. Masson, not only is he in house arrest, but do you think also like the captiveness could maybe mean like his feeling of captivity working in the government sphere rather than just becoming like a writer from the beginning of his life? Or do you think he was like he still felt free in that public job as well?
You're talking about Milton?
Yes.
So the analogy between Samson and Milton, does it apply further to the way Milton regarded himself fulfilling the office in parliamentary office, felt himself rather fettered?
Yes.
I don't know if he's reflecting on that here or not, and we can only imagine that he might. I mean, he felt a duty to do it. He came back from Italy because of this, thought there was a great cause that he needed to put himself behind, and set aside his own personal sense of vocation for a long time, over a decade. And I can imagine it was rather burdensome to him, the drudgery of having to do that and not do the thing that he felt that he was meant to do and had been gifted to do. So I can imagine that might be a part of it. Yeah. And again, this is why it's such an interesting poem, is it not only reflects on Samson, points forward to Jesus, but seems to also refer to Mr. Milton himself. And it's such a fascinating, and people could say from the psychological school, well, he's just projecting himself into the text. I think it's more the other way around. When he reads the biblical text, he sees an analog in his own life as a Christian and thinks actually there is only one path, and that is that's the Via Dolorosa. It's the way of the cross. And I am on the way of the cross, so therefore I will have cross bearing in my life. And yet in that, there is a freedom, knowing that at the end of that road, although I suffer and die, I will rise again. That's the freedom he has. Right? I can't be vanquished. Even when I lose, I win, because he rose from the dead. So there's a little bit of this. So note how he describes this. His old father Manoah, who endeavors the like, and withal tells him his purpose to procure his liberty by ransom. Lastly, that this feast was proclaimed by the Philistines as a day of thanksgiving for their deliverance from the hands of Samson, which yet more troubles him. So he's troubled that God is being dishonored because the Philistines are giving thanks to their gods. So it's not just that he's failed, it's that his enemies are triumphing over his God. This is what bothers him. He has been a bad witness. People believe that Dagon is God. That is not why he was sent. The angel did not come to proclaim his birth for this to happen. So he's in mental confusion over this. How did it end like this in such a state? And so he's going to have to reflect on that. And his reflections, which are expressed in his speeches, there's a process of transformation in Samson himself, which shows a development and awareness of God's plan, even in the midst of an apparently senseless situation in which, as I say, he's no deliverer at all, apparently, and is incapable of doing this. And he's visited by a variety of people and so forth. And he gives the whole plot there. But Samson, so I'll read some of it. I'm not going to read the whole thing because I don't have time here, unfortunately. But Samson begins, "A little onward, lend thy guiding hand to these dark steps. A little further on, for yonder bank hath choice of sun or shade. There I am wont to sit, when any chance relieves me from my task of servile toil. Daily in the common prison else enjoined me, where I, a prisoner chained, scarcely freely draw the air imprisoned also, close and damp. Unwholesome draught. But here I feel amends, the breath of heaven fresh blowing, pure and sweet, with day spring born. Here leave me to respire. This day a solemn feast the people hold to Dagon, their sea idol, and forbid laborious works. Unwillingly this rest their superstition yields me." So it's a day of rest for Dagon. Dagon has done his work, and now Dagon rests, right? So the seventh day, on the seventh day, the Lord rests from his work. On this day of Thanksgiving, Dagon is going to rest from his work because he's done his work. Samson's crushed. "Hence, with leave retiring from the popular noise, I seek this unfrequented place to find some ease. Ease to the body some, none to the mind from restless thoughts, that like a deadly swarm of hornets armed, no sooner found alone, but rush upon me thronging and present times past, what once I was, and what am now. Oh, wherefore was my birth? From heaven foretold, twice by an angel, who at last in sight of both my parents all in flames ascended from off the altar where an offering burned, as in a fiery column charioting his godlike presence, and from some great act or benefit revealed to Abraham's race. Wherefore? Why was my breeding ordered and prescribed as of a person separate to God, designed for great exploits, if I must die betrayed, captived, and both my eyes put out, made of my enemies the scorn and gaze, to grind in brazen fetters under task with this heaven-gifted strength? O glorious strength, put to the labor of a beast, debased lower than bondslave. Promise was that I should Israel from Philistines' yoke deliver. Ask for this great deliverer now, and find him eyeless in Gaza at the mill with slaves, himself in bonds under Philistine yoke. Yet stay, let me not rashly call in doubt divine prediction. What if all foretold had been fulfilled, but through mine own default? Whom have I to complain of but myself? Who this high gift of strength committed to me? In what part lodged? How easily bereft me? Under the seal of silence could not keep, but weakly to a woman must reveal it, or come with importunity and tears. O impotence of mind in body strong! But what is strength without a double share of wisdom? Vast, unwieldy, burdensome, proudly secure, yet liable to fall by weakest subtleties, not made to rule, but to subserve where wisdom bears command. God, when he gave me strength to show withal how slight the gift was, hung it in my hair. But peace, I must not quarrel with the will of highest dispensation, which herein haply had ends above my reach to know. Suffices that to me strength is my bane, and proves the scourge of all my miseries. So many and so huge that each apart would ask a life to wail. But chief of all, O loss of sight, of thee I most complain. Blind among enemies, O worse than chains. Dungeon or beggary or decrepit age, light, the prime work of God to me, is extinct, and all her various objects of delight annulled, which might in part my grief have eased, inferior to the vilest now become of man or worm. The vilest here excel me. They creep, yet see. I, dark and light exposed to daily fraud, contempt, abuse, and wrong, within doors or without, still as a fool, in power of others, never in my own. Scarce half I seem to live, dead more than half. O dark, 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 amid the blaze of noon, irrecoverably dark, total eclipse without all hope of day. O first created beam, and thou created word, let there be light, and light was over all. Why am I thus bereaved thy prime decree? The sun to me is dark, and silent as the moon, when she deserts the night hid in her vacant interlunar cave, since light so necessary is to life, and almost life itself. If it be true that light is in the soul, she all in every part, why was the sight to such a tender ball as the eye confined? So obvious and so easy to be quenched, and not as feeling through all parts diffused, that she might look at will through every pore. Then had I not been thus exiled from light, as in the land of darkness, yet in light, to live a life half dead, a living death, and buried, but oh, yet more miserable, myself, my sepulchre, a moving grave, buried, yet not exempt by privilege of death and burial, from worst of other evils, pains and wrongs, but made hereby obnoxious more to all the miseries of life, life in captivity among inhuman foes. But who are these? For with joint pace I hear the tread of many feet, steering this way. Perhaps my enemies who come to stare at my affliction, and perhaps to insult their daily practice to afflict me more. So you note that in his opening speech, which is quite the speech, 114 lines, he invokes themes that he has raised repeatedly throughout his work, as we've seen. When I consider how my days are spent, on his blindness, that's on it. And again, the invocation of light in Book 3 of Paradise Lost. And there, when he was blind equally and talked about some of the similar sorts of themes here he amplifies it that much more so, because now it's not just the poet who's reflecting on his blindness, it's the main protagonist. And thinking about what that means. And of course, light has manifold connotations. It's obviously the physical sun, but there is, as we know, a spiritual light that Milton has brought to our attention, which as of yet Samson does not seem to see. He externalized light as if it were only something that comes into the physical eye. And being deprived of physical sight, he has no light. And what he's going to do, and this is the growth of the character, he's going to come to faith. He doesn't have faith. He has a sense of vocation. He thought it resided in his own strength. In other words, he was his own deliverer. He's been called the deliverer, has he not? So he saw, if you want to talk about the type and antitype, the typological way of looking at Scripture, although he is a type of Christ, he thinks that he is the deliverer. In other words, he sees himself as a Christ. He does not yet have faith in Christ. Once, by the end of the book, or rather the tragedy, he will have faith, because he will come to an awareness of why he was called this, why there were signs, etc. So in that sense, he's going to be a model for his audience of not looking to the ways of the world, but rather to a different sort of deliverer, Adam's seed. Anyway, this is he. So here's the chorus. Now the chorus in the classical epics functions something like the public, the city. They tend to be sympathetic to the hero in the Greek choruses. But there's a lot of choruses can be fickle. They're not to be trusted. They say what they see, but what they see isn't necessarily correct. So the chorus, this is he. Softly a while. Let us break in upon him. O change beyond report, thought, or belief. See how he lies at random, carelessly diffused, with languished head unpropped, as one past hope, abandoned, and by himself given over, in slavish habit, ill-fitted weeds, or worn and soiled, or do my eyes misrepresent? Can this be he, that heroic, that renowned, irresistible Samson, whom unarmed, no strength of man, or fiercest wild beast could withstand, who tore the lion as the lion tears the kid, ran on embattled armies clad in iron, and weaponless himself made arms ridiculous? Useless the forgery of brazen shield and spear, the hammered cuirass, Chalabian tempered steel, and frock of mail, adamantine proof. But safest he who stood aloof when insupportably his foot advanced, in scorn of their proud arms and warlike tools, spurned them to death by troops. The bold Ascalonite from Ascalon, the city, or Ashkelon, one of the 5 cities of the Philistines, fled from his lion ramp. Old warriors turned their plated backs under his heel, or groveling, soiled their crested helmets in the dust. Then, with what trivial weapon came to hand? The jaw of a dead ass, his sword of bone. 1,000 foreskins fell, 1,000 men. The flower of Palestine and Ramath Lehi, famous to this day. Then by main force pulled up, and on his shoulders bore the gates of Asa, post and massy bar, up to the hill of Hebron, seat of giants old. No journey of a Sabbath day, and loaded so, like whom the Gentiles feign to bear up to heaven. Reference here to Atlas, who bore the world on his shoulders. Which shall I first bewail? Thy bondage or lost sight? Prison within prison, inseparably dark. Thou art become a worst imprisonment, the dungeon of thyself. Thy soul, which men enjoying sight off without cause complain, imprisoned now indeed, in real darkness of the body dwells, shut up from outward light, to incorporate with gloomy night. For inward light, alas, puts forth no visual beam, O mirror of our fickle state. So it's a reference to original sin. We have an inner light, but it actually puts forth no beam. That's a fit representation of our own spiritual nature. Since man on earth unparalleled, the rarer thy example stands, by how much from the top of wondrous glory, strongest of mortal men, to lowest pitch of abject fortune thou art fallen. So he's the fit subject of a tragedy. A tragic figure has to be a man greater than we are, so that we might admire him and see the descent, how far the fall is. And he is this far. Like, what an abject man he is. And in some sense, it's not mentioned here yet, but it's very much like Oedipus, because he leaves Oedipus Rex blinded, walking off the stage, hobbling. So he was the great prophesied figure, the deliverer of Thebes, but also the curse upon his people, and he leaves like a cursed man. That's how we meet this man. He's cursed, but he adds to that a theological framework to this, because he's not only cursed, he is triumphed over by the gods of the Philistines, chiefly Dagon, the fish god. For him I reckon not in high estate, whom long descent of birth or the sphere of fortune raises, but thee whose strength, while virtue was her mate, might have subdued the earth, universally crowned with highest praises. So it's not that he was born a king, it's that he had virtue. He was a great man. and now he is fallen from that. So it's a moral goodness that he's lost. That's his failing. It's a genuine sin. It's not that you've fallen from the state of being a king and now you're just a commoner. You are a judge and marked by a righteousness which was symbolized by the Nazirite vows, etc. And you have committed adultery with numerous women of the Philistines and have regularly acted this way, and now look at you. Samson, I hear the sound of words, their sense the air dissolves, unjointed ere it reach my ear. Does that mean that he's too grief-stricken to hear what they have to say? Chorus, he speaks, let us draw nigh. Matchless in might, the glory late of Israel, now the grief, we come thy friends and neighbors, not unknown from Eshtaol and Zorah's fruitful vale, to visit or bewail thee, or if better counsel or consolation we may bring, solve to thy sores. Apt words have power to assuage the tumors of a troubled mind, and are as balm to festered wounds. They want to be compassionate, show him mercy, sit alongside of him. Your coming, friends, revives me, for I learn now of my own experience, not by talk, how counterfeit a coin they are, who friends bear in their superscription. Of the most I would be understood. In prosperous days they swarm, but in adverse withdraw their head, not to be found, though sought. Ye see, O friends, how many evils have enclosed me round. Yet that which was the worst now least afflicts me. Blindness. For had I sight, confused with shame, how could I once look up, or heave the head? Who like a foolish pilot have shipwrecked my vessel, trusted to me from above, gloriously rigged. And for a word, a tear, fool, have divulged the secret gift of God to a deceitful woman. Tell me, friends, this is not because he's blind. It's because he feels morally guilty. He's broken his word. He's betrayed his faith. He's betrayed his vows. Tell me, friends, am I not sung and proverbed for a fool in every street? Do they not say, how well are come upon him his deserts? Yet why? Immeasurable strength they might behold in me. Of wisdom, nothing more than mean. This with the other should at least have paired. These two proportioned ill drove me transverse. So he was physically strong and lacking in wisdom. And he needed both. So again, the main theme is there is no strength without wisdom. And the wisdom of God is going to be demonstrated in Samson Agonistes, in the development of the awareness of Samson, wherein a true vocation as a deliverer of Israel lies. Chorus, tax not thine disposal, wisest men have erred, and by bad women been deceived, and shall again, probably thinking of Solomon, the wise, pretend they ne'er so wise. Oh no, of course not. This is not about Solomon because he doesn't live yet. Comes after David, and we're not yet at David. Never mind. Still, it could be a reference to Adam, I guess. Pretend they ne'er so wise. Deject not then so overmuch thyself, who hast of sorrow thy full load besides. Yet truth to say, I oft have heard men wonder why thou shouldst wed Philistine woman, rather than of thine own tribe fairer, or as fair, at least of thy own nation, and as noble. So what's with the taking up with the women from the Philistines? Like, what's with this? There are prettier women in your own tribe. Is like, what brought you to do this? So now we get the story. The first I saw at Timnah, and she pleased me, not my parents, that I sought to wed, the daughter of an infidel. They knew not that what I motioned was of God. I knew from intimate impulse, and therefore urged the marriage on. God drove him to do that, he says. That by occasion hence I might begin Israel's deliverance, the work to which I was divinely called. She, proving false, the next I took to wife, oh that I never had, fond wish too late, was in the vale of Sorek, Delilah, that specious monster, my accomplished snare. I thought it lawful from my former act, and the same end, still watching to oppress Israel's oppressors. Of what now I suffer, she was not the prime cause, but I myself, who vanquished with a peal of words, O weakness, gave up my fort of silence to a woman. So he doesn't actually, so they blame the women, he doesn't blame the women. The first one he went after because he felt God told him to do it as a way of bringing down the Philistines. The second, he thought, oh, well, it's a Philistine, so the first thing applies here, he was wrong. And the failure, though, is himself. Now, he is accusing himself. Remember in Book 9 of Paradise Lost, Adam's accusing Eve, Eve's accusing Adam, but neither accuse themselves. We're in a different state here. Samson is accusing himself of what has brought him down to this state. And that's interesting. So just note there. Chorus, in seeking just occasion to provoke the Philistine, thy country's enemy, thou never wast remiss. I bear thee witness, yet Israel still serves with all his sons. That fault I take not on me, but transfer on Israel's governors and heads of tribes, who seeing those great acts which God had done singly by me against their conquerors, acknowledge not, or not at all considered deliverance offered. I, on the other side, used no ambition to commend my deeds. The deeds themselves, though mute, spoke loud the doer. But they persisted, deaf, and would not seem to count them things worth notice, till at length their lords, the Philistines, with gathered powers entered Judea seeking me, who then, safe to the rock of Etham, was retired, not flying, but forecasting in what place to set upon them, what advantaged best. Meanwhile, the men of Judah, to prevent the harass of their land, beset me round. I willingly, on some conditions, came into their hands, and they as gladly yield me to the uncircumcised a welcome prey, bound with 2 cords. But cords to me were threads, touched with a flame. On their whole host I flew unarmed, and with a trivial weapon felled their choicest youth. They only lived who fled. Had Judah that day joined, or one whole tribe, they had by this possessed the towers of Gath, and lorded over them whom they now serve. But what more oft in nations grown corrupt. Now here's Milton's general wise statement about the lot of nations who don't acknowledge God for their deliverance and don't see the moment of deliverance. So here's the statement. But what more oft in nations grown corrupt and by their vices brought to servitude than to love bondage more than liberty, bondage with ease than strenuous liberty, and to despise or envy or suspect whom God hath of his special favor raised as their deliverer. If he ought begin, how frequent to desert him, and at last to heap ingratitude on worthiest deeds. It's probably a reflection on what happened to Cromwell. And so why did the Cromwell's republic fall even before Cromwell himself died? Because his nations loved bondage more than strenuous liberty. They didn't want liberty. They did exactly the same sorts of things that they accused Charles I of. Course, thy words to my remembrance bring, how Succoth and the fort of Penuel this great deliverer contemned, the matchless Gideon in pursuit of Madian and her vanquished kings, and how ingrateful Ephraim had dealt with Jephthah, who by argument, not worse than by his shield and spear, defended Israel from the Ammonite. Had not his prowess quelled their pride in that sore battle when so many died without reprieve, adjudged to death, for want of well pronouncing shibboleth. Samson. Of such examples, add me to the roll. Me, easily. Indeed, mine may neglect, but God's proposed deliverance, not so. So you can add me to the list of those that God has sent as deliverers, and his nation rejected and did not see a deliverer in it, was not delivered. But don't slight God's deliverance. It's not God. God will deliver. So there's a faith already awakening in him, and you'll see this conviction grows as it goes. And so in the last 24 hours, we will see a transformation, so that now Samson is prepared and has faith to do what he hitherto lacked. Just are the ways of God, and justifiable to men. The chorus might be speaking for Milton here. He's repeatedly talked about justifying the ways of God to men. Unless there be who think not God at all. If any be, they walk obscure. And that is in the dark. They can't see at all. Anybody who thinks that there's no God. For of such doctrine never was there school, but the heart of the fool. And no man therein doctor but himself. The fool says in his heart there's no God, right? Citing scripture. There's never been a school of atheism. Never. It's a fool's doctrine. Yet more there be who doubt his ways not just. As to his own edicts, found contradicting, then give the reins to wandering thought, regardless of his glory's diminution, till by their own perplexities involved, they ravel more, still less resolved, but never find self-satisfying solution. As if they would confine the interminable and tie him up to his own prescript, who made our laws to bind us, not himself, and hath full right to exempt whomso it pleases him by choice from national obstruction, without taint of sin or legal debt. For with his own laws he can best dispense. We would not else, who never wanted means, nor in respect of the enemy just cause to set his people free, have prompted this heroic Nazarite against his vow of strictest purity to seek in marriage that fallacious bride, unclean, unchaste. Down reason then, at least vain reasonings down, though reason here aver that moral verdict quits her of unclean, unchaste was subsequent, her stain not his. But see, here comes thy reverend sire with careful step, locks white as down, old Manoah. Advise forthwith how thou oughtst to receive him. I'm going to skip over Manoah here. Manoah is going to, as I say, offer to ransom him out. So the irony is here, Samson is the ransom, he's the deliverer, and he's being offered, his father's offering a ransom up for him. He doesn't understand who he is, and why would he not? So he looks at Samson. You're not, as I say, you're not in a position to deliver anyone. So I'll skip over that and the long dialogue and interchange with Manoah of the father with the son. And I'll pick it up 200 lines down. 540 thereabouts. Oh no, actually that's still in the dialogue with Manoah. Oh, skip over to where does this go? 652. There we go. Many are the sayings of the wise, in ancient and in modern books enrolled, extolling patience as the truest fortitude, and to the bearing well of all calamities, all chances incident to man's frail life. Consolatories writ with studied argument and much persuasion sought, lenient of grief and anxious thought. But with the afflicted in his pangs, their sound little prevails, or rather seems a tune harsh and of dissonant mood from his complaint, unless he feels within some source of consolation from above. Secret refreshings that repair his strength and fainting spirits uphold. I'm going to stop there. It's interrupting the course. But note here we are making a progression. You talked about wisdom early. You didn't have wisdom. Even if you're given wisdom, wisdom doesn't comfort you on its own. In the midst of a suffering, in the midst of this fiery trial of persecution or of being in the state that Samson's in, the wisdom itself doesn't speak to you unless some source of consolation comes from above. So God needs to intervene even then for wisdom to be heard. And so the course thus prays then, God of our fathers, what is man? What is man? That thou towards him with hand so various, or might I say contrarious, temperst thy providence through his short course, not evenly, as thou rulest the angelic orders and inferior creatures mute, irrational and brute, nor do I name of men the common root, that wandering loose about grow up and perish, as the summer fly, heads without name, no more remembered, but such as thou hast solemnly elected, with gifts and graces eminently adorned, to some great work, thy glory, and people's safety, which in part they effect, yet towards thee, thus dignified, thou oft amidst their height of noon changest thy countenance, and thy hand, with no regard of highest favors past, from thee on them, or them to thee of service. So, as gifted as Samson was, and full of something, a strength that all the world acknowledged, something in your providence pulls your hand back and brings them down. What is this? Nor only dost degrade them, or remit to life obscured, which were a fair demission, but throws them lower than thou didst exalt them high, unseemly falls in human eye, too grievous for the trespass or omission, oft leaves them to the hostile sword of heathen and profane, their carcasses to dogs and fowls, a prey or else captive, or to the unjust tribunals, under change of times. Milton thinking about himself surely here. And condemnation of the ingrateful multitude. If these they escape, perhaps in poverty, with sicknesses and disease thou bowest them down, painful diseases and deformed, in crude old age, though not disordinate, yet causeless suffering, the punishment of dissolute days. In fine, that is in close, just or unjust, alike seem miserable, for oft alike both come to evil end. This sounds like the wisdom of Ecclesiastes. Vanity, right? All is vanity. So deal not with this once thy glory. So deal not with this once thy glorious champion, the image of thy strength and mighty minister. Remember, it's still a prayer. What do I beg? How hast thou dealt already? Behold him in his state calamitous, and turn his labors, for thou canst, to peaceful end. But who is this? What thing of sea or land? Female of sex, it seems, that so bedecked, ornate, and gay comes this way, sailing like a stately ship of Tarsus, bound for the isles of Javan or Gadir, with all her bravery on and tackle trim, sails filled and streamers waving, courted by all the winds that hold them play. As amber, scent of odorous perfume, her harbinger a damsel trained behind. Some rich Philistine matron she may seem. And now at nearer view no other certain than Delilah thy wife. My wife? My traitress, let her not come near me. Yet on she moves, now stands and eyes thee fixed, above t'have spoke, but now with head declined like a fair flower surcharged with dew she weeps, and words addressed seemed into tears dissolved, wetting the borders of her silken veil. But now again she makes address to speak. With doubtful feet and wavering resolution I came, still dreading thy displeasure, Samson, which to have merited without excuse I cannot but acknowledge. Yet if tears may expiate, though the fact more evil drew in the perverse event than I foresaw, my penance hath not slackened, though my pardon no way assured. But conjugal affection prevailing over fear and timorous doubt had led me on, desirous to behold once more thy face, and know of thy estate, if aught in my ability may serve to lighten what thou hast suffered, and appease thy mind with what amends is in my power, though late, yet in some part to recompense my rash but more unfortunate misdeed. So she cries and calls for forgiveness, like Eve does with Adam. Seemingly. Different context, different situation, different man, different woman. Out! Out, hyena! These are thy wonted arts, and arts of every woman false like thee. Not every woman, by the way. This is not a universal statement about women. It's the art of every woman false like thee. To break all faith, all vows, deceive, betray, then, as repentant, to submit, beseech, and reconcile and moved with feigned remorse, confess and promise wonders in her charge, in her change, not truly penitent, but chief to try her husband, how far urged his patience bears, his virtue or weakness which way to assail. Then, with more cautious and instructed skill, again transgresses and again submits. That wisest and best men, full oft beguiled with goodness, principled not to reject the penitent, but ever to forgive, are drawn to wear out miserable days, entangled with a poisonous bosom snake, if not by quick destruction, soon cut off, as I by thee to ages an example. So again, this is not Milton talking about women in general. He's talking about a particular type of woman who is disingenuous. Yet hear me, Samson. And when he describes her, he's very much describing her like Satan, a serpentine, deceptive creature, beguiling in her speech. Oh, yet hear me, Samson, not that I endeavor to lessen or extenuate my offense, but that on the other side, if it be weighed by itself, with aggravations not surcharged, or else with just allowance counterpoised, I may, if possible, thy pardon find the easier towards me, or thy hatred less. First granting, as I do, it was a weakness in me, but incident to all our sex, curiosity, inquisitive, importune of secrets. Then, with like infirmity to publish them, both common female faults. So she's the misogynist. It's the weakness of my sex that I did this to begin with. That I asked for the secret, and it was the weakness of my sex that I told everybody. It's not my fault. It's women. It's the fault of being a woman. He doesn't say that. She does. As a way of excusing herself. Not true, by the way. Was it not weakness also to make known for importunity, that is for naught, wherein consisted all thy strength and safety? To what I did, thou showest me first the way, but I to enemies revealed, and should not. Nor shouldst thou have trusted that to woman's frailty. So it's your fault. You should never have trusted somebody as weak as I was, such a secret. You're the strong one. Again, this is Eve blaming Adam. Same sort of language here. So she appeared to be this, and actually now she's blaming him. It's actually your fault for having allowed this to begin with. Let weakness then with weakness come to parle, so near related, or the same of kind, then forgive mine, that men may censure thine the gentler, if severely thou exact not more strength from me than in thyself was found. And what if love, which thou interpretest hate, the jealousy of love, powerful of sway in human hearts, nor less in mine towards thee, caused what I did? I saw thee mutable of fancy. Mutable of fancy. Feared lest one day thou wouldst leave me as her at Timnah. That was it. You got rid of one wife. I thought you were going to get rid of me as well. Sought by all means, therefore, how to endear and hold thee to me firmest. So I wanted your closest secret, so I would blackmail you. No better way I saw than by importuning to learn thy secrets. Get into my power, thy key of strength and safety. Thou wilt say, why then revealed? I was assured by those against thee, but safe custody and hold. That made for me, I knew that liberty would draw thee forth to perilous enterprises, while I at home sate full of cares and fears, wailing thy absence in my widowed bed. Here I should still enjoy thee day and night, mine and love's prisoner, not the Philistines. Whole to myself, unhazarded abroad, fearless at home of partners in my love. These reasons in love's law hast passed for good, though fond and reasonless to some perhaps. And love hath oft, well-meaning, wrought much woe, yet always pity or pardon hath obtained. Be not unlike all others, nor not austere, as thou art strong, inflexible as steel, if thou in strength all mortals dost exceed, in uncompassionate anger do not so. How cunningly the sorceress displays her own transgressions, to upbraid me mine. That malice, not repentance, brought thee hither, by this appears. I gave, thou sayest, the example. I led the way, bitter reproach, but true. I to myself was false, ere thou to me. Such pardon therefore as I give my folly, take to thy wicked deed, which when thou seest impartial, self-severe, inexorable, thou wilt renounce thy seeking, and much rather confess it feigned. Weakness is thy excuse, and I believe it. Weakness to resist Philistine gold. If weakness may excuse, what murderer, what traitor, parricide, incestuous, sacrilegious, but may plead it? All wickedness is weakness. That plea, therefore, with God or man will gain thee no remission. But love constrain thee? Call it furious rage to satisfy thy lust. Love seeks to have love. But my love, how couldst thou hope, who tookst the way to raise in me inexpiable hate, knowing, as needs I must, by thee betrayed? In vain thou strives to cover shame with shame, or by evasions thy crime uncoverest more. So note, there's the dialogue here. It sounds like, again, the dialogues we've had between Adam and Eve and the serpent, and these sorts of, since thou determines weakness for no plea in man or woman, though to thy own condemning. I hear Christians regularly, by the way, ask forgiveness for weakness in public prayers. I find it extraordinary. This is no prayer. Though to thy own condemning, hear what assaults I had, what snares besides, what sieges girt me around, ere I consented, what might have awed the best resolved of men, the constantest rather, to have yielded without blame. It was not gold, as to my charge thou layest, that wrought with me. Thou knowest the magistrates and princes of my country come in person, solicited, commanded, threatened, urged, adjured by all the bonds of civil duty and of religion, pressed, how just it was, how honorable, how glorious to entrap a common enemy who had destroyed such numbers of our nation. And the priest was not far behind, but ever at my ear, preaching how meritorious with the gods it would be to ensnare an irreligious dishonorer of Dagon. What had I to oppose against such powerful arguments? Only my love of thee held long debate, and combated in silence all these reasons with hard contest. At length, that grounded maxim, so rife and celebrated in the mouths of wisest men, that to the public good, private respects must yield, with grave authority took full possession of me and prevailed. Virtue, as I thought, truth, duty so enjoining. So, last argument is that she did the public good and ignored her private interests. She gave up her... Now, Milton's contention throughout, including in Areopagitica and other words, is that your personal belief, your personal conviction, the truth of that must be defended, not sacrificed to the public good. Truth is individually held, must be expressed in public, and must not be given up to what the so-called public good, which is going to betray your conscience. It must be spoken, it must be defended. And there is no such thing as a good that is public that will sacrifice the private for it, as if it in contradiction like that, and particularly in the name of a religion. And that's what's at stake here. I thought where all thy circling wiles would end, in feigned religion, smooth hypocrisy. But had thy love still odiously pretended, been as it ought sincere, it would have taught thee far other reasonings, brought forth other deeds. I, before all the daughters of my tribe and of my nation, chose thee from among my enemies. Love thee as too well thou knewest, too well, unbosomed all my secrets to thee, but only of levity, but overpowered by thy request, how could deny thee nothing? Yet now am judged an enemy. Why then didst thou at first receive me for thy husband? Then, as since then, thy country's foe professed. Being once a wife, for me thou wast to leave parents and country, nor was I their subject, nor under their protection, but my own. Not thou mine, not theirs. So, in other words, you didn't belong to that. You betrayed me from the beginning. You were set up by the priest to do all this. I'll skip to the end of this and move the plot on because I am running short. Chorus, line 996. She's gone. A manifest serpent by her sting, discovered in the end, till now concealed. Conclusion of this passage. Let her go. God sent her to debase me and aggravate my folly, who committed to such a viper his most sacred trust of secrecy, my safety and my life. Yet beauty, though injurious, hath strange power, after offense returning to regain love once possessed, nor can be easily repulsed without much inward passion felt and secret sting of amorous remorse. Love quarrels often pleasing, concord end, not wedlock treachery endangering life. It is not virtue, wisdom, valor, wit, strength, comeliness of shape, or amplest merit that woman's love can win or long inherit. But what it is, hard is to say, harder to hit, which way soever man refer it. Much like thy riddle, Samson, in one day or 7, though one should musing sit. If any of these, or all, the Timnean bride, had not so soon preferred thy paranymph, worthless to thee compared, successor in thy bed, nor both, so loosely disallied their nuptials, nor this last so treacherously had shorn the fatal harvest of thy head, is it for that such outward ornament was lavished on their sex, that inward gifts were left for haste, unfinished, judgment scant, capacity not raised to apprehend of value what is best in choice, but oftest to effect the wrong, or was too much of self-love mixed, of constancy no root infixed, that either they love nothing or not long. Whate'er it be, to wisest men and best, seeming at first all heavenly, under virgin veil, soft, modest, meek, demure, once joined, the contrary, she proves a thorn in testin, far within, defensive arms, a cleaving mischief, in his way to virtue, adverse and turbulent, or by her charms draws him awry enslaved, with dotage and his sense depraved, to folly and shameful deeds which ruin ends. What pilot so expert but needs must wreck, embarked with such a steersmate at the helm? Therefore, I'll come to the end of this. Therefore, God's universal law gave to the man despotic power over his female in due awe, not from that right to part an hour, smile she or lower, so shall he least confusion draw in his whole life, not swayed by female usurpation nor dismayed. But had we best retire, I see a storm. Okay, so I'm going to skip over this. Harafa comes in, and I'm going to have to finish here, and I'll pick it up next time. And I'm going to do it